There's a man who raised Diana Ross's children, who stood beside her during some of her biggest career moments, who was married to her for 6 years during the height of her solo success. And if you ask most people today who Diana Ross's first husband was, they can't tell you his name. Some don't even know Diana was married before Arne Naess. The erasure is that complete. The disappearance is that thorough. His name was Robert Ellis Silberstein, and the story of what happened to him reveals something uncomfortable about fame, about how women's success sometimes requires men's invisibility, and about the bargains people make when they love someone more famous than themselves. Some of y'all remember 1971. Diana had just gone solo, had just left the Supremes, and she married a man most people had never heard of, a music manager, someone who understood the industry but didn't need the spotlight. But the marriage came with a secret. Diana was already pregnant when she walked down the aisle, and the baby she was carrying wasn't Robert's. It was Berry Gordy's. Everyone in the Motown inner circle knew. Robert knew. Diana knew. Berry knew. And Robert married Diana anyway, raised that child as his own, gave her his name, loved her like she was his blood. That decision, Robert's willingness to step into a situation most men would run from, tells you everything about who Robert Silberstein was, and makes his subsequent erasure from Diana's story even more striking. The wedding happened quietly. From that first moment, Robert started disappearing into Diana's shadow, started becoming Diana Ross's husband instead of Robert Ellis Silberstein. Rhonda was born in August 1971, beautiful baby girl who looked nothing like Robert and everything like Berry Gordy. And Robert held that baby, claimed that baby, gave Rhonda his last name, became her father in every way that mattered except biology. Some of y'all understand what that takes, the kind of man who can love a child that isn't his, who can stand beside a woman carrying another man's baby and say, "I'm here anyway." Robert did that. And Diana's narrative has spent 50 years making sure nobody remembers he did. Robert and Diana had 2 more daughters together, Tracee Ellis Ross, born in 1972, Chutney Ross, born in 1975. Robert raised all 3 girls while managing Diana's increasingly complicated career and his own roster of musical clients. He was father, husband, manager, supporter. But here's what makes Robert's story fascinating. He wasn't weak, wasn't a hanger-on. Robert managed major artists, had his own successful career, and still he disappeared. Still he became invisible. The marriage lasted until 1977, 6 years, long enough to build a family. And when it ended, Robert didn't fight publicly, didn't sell stories to tabloids, didn't write a tell-all book. Just stepped back into the shadows and let Diana control the narrative. Let her become the only story anyone told. Today, Robert barely exists in Diana's public history. Museum exhibits skip over him. Documentaries mention him in passing. And Robert, the man who actually married her, who raised her children, becomes a footnote nobody reads. What happened to Robert Ellis Silberstein? And why has Diana's success required his complete disappearance from the story? Understanding what happened to Robert requires understanding what the marriage actually was, what it cost Robert to love someone that famous, what he gained and what he lost in that bargain. Robert was successful before Diana. He managed artists, had built relationships. He wasn't nobody trying to become somebody through Diana's fame. But marrying Diana changed everything. Suddenly, Robert wasn't Robert Ellis Silberstein, music manager. He was Diana Ross's husband. His identity got subsumed. His accomplishments got overshadowed. His entire existence got filtered through Diana's celebrity. Some of y'all who've loved someone more successful than you understand this. The way their light makes you invisible. The way people look past you to see them. Robert lived that reality every single day. The pregnancy situation made it harder. Robert knew Rhonda was Berry's child, knew everyone at Motown knew it. And Robert held his head up anyway, claimed Rhonda publicly, loved her fiercely, refused to let biology determine his role as father. That took strength most people don't have. Diana was building her solo empire during these years. Ain't No Mountain High Enough in 1970, Touch Me in the Morning in 1973, Theme for Mahogany in 1975, Love Hangover in 1976. Diana was ascending, and Robert was home with the children while Diana toured, recorded, and built the legend. That dynamic, Robert as homemaker while Diana conquered the world, was unusual in the 1970s. Diana was the breadwinner, Robert was the anchor. And that reversal made Robert even more invisible to a public that didn't know how to understand men who supported rather than led. Berry Gordy remained in Diana's life during the marriage, a presence, a force, a complication. Robert had to accept that his wife's former lover and Rhonda's biological father would always be there, and Robert did it with dignity that nobody acknowledged. The girls remember Robert differently than the public does. Tracee Ellis Ross has spoken lovingly about her father, about the man who showed up, who stayed, who raised them with care. Tracee knows what the public has forgotten, that Robert was real, solid, present in ways that mattered more than fame. By 1977, the marriage was ending. The reasons were private, complex. The balance that had held things together for 6 years was collapsing, and the divorce came quietly. Robert didn't fight for custody, didn't demand money, didn't sell his story, just stepped back and let Diana move forward. And in doing so, Robert made himself even more invisible, even more erasable, even more forgettable. What happened next reveals the cost of loving someone more famous than yourself. The price Robert paid for putting Diana's career and Diana's image above his own story. After the divorce, Robert Ellis Silberstein disappeared from Diana's narrative almost immediately. Diana moved on, eventually married Norwegian shipping magnate Arne Naess in 1986, and the story became Diana and Arne, with Robert reduced to a historical footnote that barely registered. But Robert didn't disappear from the world, just from Diana's story. Understanding where Robert went after 1977 reveals a man who continued living. Robert continued managing artists, continued working in the music industry. His client roster included successful acts. His reputation remained solid among people who actually worked with him. He was known as someone competent and reliable, just not known by the public. He maintained relationships with his daughters, stayed present in their lives even as they grew up as Diana Ross's children. The girls saw him, knew him, loved him, but publicly they became extensions of Diana's brand, and Robert remained invisible. Some of y'all have watched men disappear like this, have seen fathers erased from narratives because mothers were more famous. Robert experienced that erasure completely. But the erasure from Diana's story was systematic. When Diana published her autobiography in 1993, Robert was barely mentioned. When documentaries were made, he appeared as a name and a date. When journalists asked about her marriages, she talked about Berry Gordy or Arne Naess, and Robert became my first husband without substance or detail. The Rhonda situation added another layer of erasure. When Rhonda finally learned the truth about her paternity, that Berry Gordy was her biological father, the public story became about Berry and Diana. Robert, the man who'd actually raised Rhonda, who'd been her father for the first 13 years of her life, was erased from even that narrative. Even Tracee Ellis Ross's success brings the Ross name back into prominence. The maternal connection dominates, the paternal connection disappears. Robert gave interviews occasionally over the years, spoke carefully, kindly, without bitterness, never sold salacious stories, never tried to reclaim his place in the narrative, never demanded recognition for raising Berry's child. That restraint, Robert's refusal to capitalize on his connection to Diana, is part of why he disappeared so completely. His dignity became his erasure. Berry Gordy wrote his autobiography and claimed Rhonda publicly. And in doing so, Berry erased Robert even further. Because if Berry was Rhonda's father and Diana's true love, what was Robert? Just an interlude, just a mistake. The cruelty of that erasure is that Robert mattered enormously to Diana, to the girls he raised, to the stability of Diana's career. But mattering privately doesn't protect you from public invisibility. And Robert learned that lesson completely. Robert Ellis Silberstein's disappearance reveals something important about how we tell stories about successful women, about what we erase and why. The narrative around Diana required her to be singular, independent, self-made, and Robert complicated that narrative. His presence suggested Diana needed support, needed partnership. So Robert got erased. Not through malice necessarily, but through narrative convenience. Diana's story works better without him. Her legend is cleaner, simpler, more powerful when Robert disappears. But Robert's erasure cost Diana something too. Cost her the ability to acknowledge partnership. Cost her the fuller, more honest story of how success actually happens through support systems and sacrifice. Diana chose Arne Naess for a second marriage, a billionaire, someone so wealthy and powerful that he couldn't be overshadowed, someone whose success matched hers. Maybe that choice reflected what Diana learned from Robert, that she needed someone who wouldn't disappear, who couldn't be erased. The erasure matters because it reveals how we value men in stories about women. Berry Gordy mattered because he was Diana's boss in Svengali. Arne Naess mattered because he was richer and more powerful. But Robert, who actually married her, who raised her children, who supported her during crucial years, Robert didn't matter enough to remember. That hierarchy says something about masculinity and fame. Men who support are invisible. Men who partner are forgettable. And Robert learned all of this by living it. The daughters know the truth. Tracee Ellis Ross knows her father showed up. Rhonda knows Robert raised her before she ever knew Berry. The private truth survived, even if the public story erased it. Maybe that's the lesson, that mattering to the people you love is worth more than mattering to the public. That legacy isn't always about being remembered by everyone. Sometimes it's about being loved by someone. Robert Ellis Silberstein didn't disappear from his life or the reality of what he contributed. And maybe Robert understands something Diana never could, that you can be forgotten by history and still matter enormously to the people who know your name. If you've ever loved someone more famous than yourself and felt yourself disappearing, share your thoughts below.